Merry Christmas, folks, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. Today I have my New Year's message. It's a love letter to my nation, not my government, from an avowed Anglophile and an old stock Canadian. As 2024 draws to its close, I would like to share my thoughts on our present socio-economic crisis under a Trudeau-led coalition government, which is destined to fall and take the nation down with it. We face significant challenges in the next several weeks and months. The current government in Canada is in utter, complete, and perfect chaos. Trump has declared that he wants Canada to become the 51st state. He even had his son post a meme of the Donald purchasing us on Amazon. Canada, one of the most resource-richest nations on the planet, on Amazon. Like we were a whore to be prostituted by our John, America. You may think that this is merely clever or funny or even a good idea, given the fact that the American economy is infinitely stronger than ours and will become even greater under an administration dedicated to reducing waste, cost, and variation. The new Department of Doge, led by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, will implement a modern version of what General Douglas MacArthur did in Japan when he unleashed Doctors Deming and Duran on them to help fix their post-war economy. Both are now lauded as heroes of industry by the Japanese for their incredible successes in transforming Japanese industry. But back to Canada and the U.S. Why not join the Union? After all, taxation is much lower in the U.S. than it is in Canada. Canadians under the Trudeau government have become poorer than even the citizens of Mississippi, which is the poorest state in the Union. But you are likely forgetting two things: that the U.S. is still being informed by the Monroe Doctrine and the American belief in manifest destiny. Moreover, if you do not know what either are, and how they relate to how Canada came into being as an autonomous nation and an independent member of the British Commonwealth, you know literally nothing of the history of your own nation. Today I heard, that was then, but this is now. To which I answer, the oldest adage regarding history ever written, namely, that those who do not study history are merely doomed to repeat it. Of course, each repetition will take on its own peculiar variation. But first, let us examine the Monroe Doctrine and its coefficient of manifest destiny. The Monroe Doctrine and manifest destiny are two significant concepts in American history that are closely related in their impact on U.S. foreign policy and territorial expansion. So the Monroe Doctrine and manifest destiny therefore had significant impacts on Canada, shaping our history and development in various ways right up until today. The Monroe Doctrine, declared in 1823, primarily aimed to prevent European influence in the interference in the Americas. While it focused on Latin America, it indirectly affected Canada by reinforcing the idea that the Western Hemisphere was under the influence of the United States. The doctrine contributed to a sense of American dominance in the region, which influenced Canadian politics, or rather policies and attitudes toward its southern neighbor. Manifest destiny was the belief that the United States was destined to expand across North America, and it had a more direct impact on Canada. This ideology fueled American expansionist ambitions, leading to tensions and conflicts with British North America, now Canada. Some key effects included territorial expansion. The idea of manifest destiny led to American interest in annexing Canadian territories. This was particularly evident during the mid-19th century when there were calls for the U.S. to expand into British-held territories in Canada. Canadian Confederation. The threat of American expansionism was a significant factor in the push for Canadian Confederation. The provinces of British North America united in 1867 to form the Dominion of Canada, partly to strengthen our defense against potential American aggression. Border disputes. Manifest Destiny contributed to several border disputes between the U.S. and Canada, including the Oregon boundary dispute, which was resolved in 1846 with the Oregon Treaty. Cultural and political influence. The expansionist ideology also influenced Canadian culture and politics, as Canadians sought to distinguish themselves from their American neighbors and assert their own national identity. Overall, the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny played crucial roles in shaping the geopolitical landscape of North America, influencing Canada's development and its relationship with the United States. But first, we need to go back to our beginnings. The very beginnings, political beginnings of Canada as a distinct nation, separate in identity from that of the USA. Our start is a parliamentary system under English common law and British constitutionalism after initial settlement by loyalist settlers who fled America after or during the American Revolutionary War into what is now Upper Canada, Ontario, insisted upon having English common law as opposed to French civil law of Lower Canada, which is now Quebec. They still have civil law in Quebec, by the way. John Graves Simcoe was the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada and had several reasons for establishing a new province under English common law. The first was to create political stability. Simcoe aimed to create a stable and orderly society, distinct from the revolutionary fervor of the United States. By implementing English common law, he sought to ensure a legal system that was familiar to both British settlers and the loyalists who had fled the American Revolution. Economic development. Simcoe believed that a well-ordered society based on English common law would attract settlers and promote economic growth. He introduced freehold land tenure, which allowed settlers to own their own land, encouraging investment and development. Social order. Simcoe wanted to establish a society based on aristocratic and conservative principles with a strong Church of England presence. He believed that English common law would support these values and help create a loyal and cohesive community. Now, my ancestors, as I like to call them, they were Methodists and Presbyterians. They weren't so anxious to have the hoity-toity aristocratic elite governing us without their input, but we're going to get to that shortly. Abolition of slavery. Simcoe was instrumental in passing legislation to gradually abolish slavery in Upper Canada, making it the first British colony to take such steps. This move was part of his broader vision of creating a just and equitable society. Simcoe's efforts laid the foundation for the development of Upper Canada as a distinct entity with its own legal and social structures, separate from both the United States and other British colonies. Now let's talk about the War of 1812. This was the first major challenge to our identity. This was indeed a challenge to our autonomy, and it played a crucial role in shaping our national identity. Its key impacts were defense against invasion. The War of 1812 saw multiple American invasions into Canadian territory, particularly in the Niagara Peninsula where I grew up. Christmas of 1813, Niagara-on-the-Lake got burned to the ground, which was then called Newark. It was the capital at that time. The successful defense against these invasions by British forces, Canadian militia, and Indigenous allies helped solidify a sense of Canadian identity and unity. National identity. The war fostered a sense of national pride and identity among Canadians. The collective effort to defend their land against American forces brought together people from diverse backgrounds, including English and French Canadians, Indigenous people, and the Loyalists. Military and civilian cooperation. The war highlighted the importance of civilian soldiers in defending the territory. The cooperation between military and civilian forces became a defining characteristic of Canadian defense efforts, which is why we have a strong militia today. Indigenous alliances. Indigenous people played a crucial role in the war. Forming alliances with both British and Canadian forces, their contributions were vital in several key battles, although their sacrifices were sadly often overlooked in the aftermath. Political and social impact. The war's outcome reinforced the need for a strong defense and contributed to the eventual push for Canadian Confederation in 1867. It also influenced Canadian policies and attitudes toward its southern neighbor. Overall, the War of 1812 was a pivotal moment in our history, marking the first significant challenge to Canadian autonomy and laying the groundwork for the development of a distinct Canadian identity. Now let's talk about one of the officers, a young ensign who served in that war, whose name was William Hamilton Merritt, one of the leading citizens of my own hometown, St. Catharines. He was a significant figure in Canadian history, particularly known for his role in the development of the Welland Canal. His contributions had a profound impact on both defense and trade in Canada. Merritt was a businessman, politician, and soldier. He was born July 3, 1793 in Bedford, New York, and he moved to Upper Canada, now Ontario, with his family and became involved in various business ventures in St. Catharines. Merritt had fought in the War of 1812 and was captured by American forces, which influenced his later endeavors. Merritt's great legacy, the Welland Canal, it was a notable achievement. He first proposed the idea in 1818 to create a canal that would connect Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, bypassing Niagara Falls. The canal was crucial for several reasons. For trade, the Welland Canal facilitated the movement of goods between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean, significantly boosting trade in the region. It allowed ships to bypass Niagara Falls, making transportation more efficient and less costly. Defense. The canal had strategic military importance. During times of conflict, such as the War of 1812, controlling the waterways was crucial for defense. The Welland Canal provided a secure route for moving troops and supplies, enhancing the region's defensive capabilities. Economic development. The construction and operation of the canal spurred economic growth in the surrounding areas. It created jobs, attracted settlers, and led to the development of towns and industries along its route, particularly because it kept water flowing throughout the winter to power mills, because the rivers were freezing up in the winter, and Merritt was annoyed that his mill was losing power when things froze over, so the canal kept that water flowing. Merritt's vision and determination was instrumental in the canal's construction. He organized local meetings, raised funds, and enlisted government support to bring the project to fruition. The Welland Canal remains to this day a vital part of Canada's transportation infrastructure and is an enduring testament to Merritt's legacy. Now, there was issues with funding. And this is where it gets fascinating. Merritt faced numerous challenges in securing funding for the Welland Canal. Initially, he hoped for government support, but when that proved insufficient, he turned to private investors, including those from the United States. He had to go back to the neighbors that had kicked him out some 40 years before. American investors were interested in the canal because it promised to enhance trade routes and economic opportunities between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean. How this impacted Canadian factories and mills. Investment and control. By accepting American investment, Merritt inadvertently allowed American businessmen to gain a controlling interest in some Canadian mills. These investors were keen on ensuring their investments were profitable, which often meant taking an active role in the management and operation of the mills. Economic influence. The influx of American capital brought with it a degree of economic influence. American investors sought to maximize their returns, which sometimes led to decisions that prioritized their interests over those of local Canadian stakeholders. Technological advancements. On the positive side, American investment also brought technological advancements and expertise to Canadian mills. This helped improve efficiency and productivity, contributing to the growth of the Canadian economy. Trade and commerce. The Welland Canal itself facilitated increased trade and commerce between Canada and the U.S. The interconnectedness meant that American businessmen had a vested interest in the success of Canadian interests, including mills. Overall, while American investment in the Welland Canal and Canadian mills brought economic benefits, it also led to a degree of foreign control and influence over Canadian industries. So much so that most of our factories and mills became wholly owned subsidiaries of American parent corporations, including General Motors, where I worked. Wholly owned subsidiary. This dynamic played a significant role in shaping our economic landscape right through until today. Why the building of the Rideau Canal coincided with that of the Welland Canal. The Rideau and the Welland Canal were both constructed in the early 19th century, and their development coincided due to several strategic, economic, and political reasons. Of course, they were of strategic importance for defense. After the War of 1812, the heightened sense of vulnerability. The Rideau Canal was built between 1826 and 1832 to provide a secure supply route between Montreal and the naval base, between Ottawa and the naval base in Kingston, potentially bypassing the potential vulnerable St. Lawrence River. This was crucial in case of another conflict with the United States. Military transport. Well, obviously you could get to Montreal as well via the Ottawa River, because the canal empties out below the rapids that would prevent you from otherwise getting to the Americas, getting to Montreal rather. Military transport. Both canals were designed to facilitate the movement of troops and supplies. The Welland Canal, completed in 1829, allowed ships to bypass the canal, making it an efficient route for military and commercial vessels. Economic development, both were trade routes. Political factors. I'm glossing over much of this. You can read the blog in length, because I've given you some good ideas of the entire perspective of how these things affect us to today. The influence of Great Britain. Both canals are part of British efforts to strengthen their influence in North America. By improving infrastructure and transportation, the British aim to secure their colonial territories and promote economic growth. Settlement and development. The construction of these canals encouraged settlement and development in the surrounding areas and along the routes of these canals. Towns and industries grew up along said routes, contributing to the economic prosperity of the regions affected. In summary, both the Rideau and the Welland Canals were built around the same time due to their strategic importance in facilitating trade, improving defense, and to establish the political objectives of strengthening our British ties in North America. But now, back to the ancestors that I mentioned to you. They weren't happy with the Conservatives being led by Bishop Strong in Toronto under a gang that was known as the Family Compact, that virtually held the legislature in Upper Canada in a vice-like grip of authoritarian control. So along came the Mackenzie-Papineau Rebellion as a reaction to both American expansionism and British colonialism. The Mackenzie-Papineau Rebellion, also known as the Rebellions of 1837, 1838, was a significant event in Canadian history. It was driven by frustrations with British colonial rule and the influence of American expansionism. William Lyon Mackenzie had a newspaper called the Colonial Advocate. He first had his offices near where the Battle of Queenston Heights was fought in Queenston, but he moved the Colonial Advocate from Queenston to Toronto, which was then called York, and he railed against the tyranny of this family compact. So much so that they tried to destroy his newspaper, but we won't get into that now. I invite you to investigate that for yourself. Mackenzie's story is a fascinating one. So the rebellions took place in both Upper Canada, now Ontario, and Lower Canada, now Quebec. Its key figures were William Lyon Mackenzie in Upper Canada and Louis-Joseph Papineau in Lower Canada. Both leaders were seeking for political reform and greater autonomy from British control. As a reaction to British colonialism, they wanted political reform. The rebels were frustrated with the lack of political reform and the dominance of the British appointed elite. They demanded responsible government, where the Executive Council would be accountable to the elected Legislative Assembly. And this is exactly what we're seeing today. The executive body of government here in Ottawa is not answering to Parliament. In fact, it thinks it can operate completely above and separate from them. It's a case of maniacal hubris. Economic grievances, economic hardships, and land issues also fueled this discontent. Many settlers felt that the colonial government favored the interests of the elite over those of the ordinary citizen. Influence of American expansionism. Republican ideals, the American Revolution, and its subsequent expansion of the United States influenced the rebels. They were inspired by Republican ideals and sought to establish a more democratic system of government. Support from the U.S. Some rebels received support from American sympathizers. For example, Mackenzie established a short-lived Republic of Canada on Navy Island in the Niagara River with the help of American volunteers. But it's the outcomes of the rebellion that's important. They were not ultimately successful. The British military crushed the uprisings. However, they led to significant changes. Lord Durham's report. The British government sent Lord Durham to investigate the causes of the rebellions. His report recommended the unification of Upper and Lower Canada and the establishment of responsible government. The Act of Union, 1840. The Act of Union merged Upper and Lower Canada into a single province, laying the groundwork for the eventual creation of the Canadian Confederation in 1867. The Mackenzie-Papineau Rebellion was a pivotal moment in struggle for Canadian self-governance and highlighted the tensions between colonial rule and the desire for democratic reform and American interference. How the Liberal Party, now how did these guys influence liberalism? This is really something that you need to understand. The Liberal Party was birthed by this rebellion. They thought the truckers were a problem. These guys were literally trying to overthrow the government. The truckers were there peacefully. The Liberal Party of Canada has its roots in the reformist movements led by figures like William Lyon Mackenzie and Louis-Joseph Papineau. These leaders were instrumental in advocating for political reform and responsible government. William Lyon Mackenzie was a prominent figure in Upper Canada, led the reform movement, sought to challenge the power of the family compact, a small group of elites who control the government. Of course, his efforts led to the Rebellion of 1837, which, although was successful, it highlighted the need for political reform and greater democratic representation. And as for Louis-Joseph Papineau from Lower Canada, Papineau led the Parti Patriote, which similarly sought to challenge the dominance of the British-appointed elite and advocate for the rights of French Canadians. The Lower Canadian Rebellion of 1837 to 1838, led by Papineau, also ended in defeat, but underscored the demand for responsible government and political change. Influence on the Liberal Party of Canada. The efforts of Mackenzie and Papineau laid the groundwork for the development of the Liberal Party. Their push for responsible government and democratic reforms resonated with many Canadians and set the stage for the emergence of a political party that would champion these ideals. The Liberal Party, officially founded in 1867, drew on the legacy of these reformist movements and leaders advocating for a more inclusive and democratic political system. And in fact, our Prime Minister during the Second World War was Mackenzie's grandson, William Lyon Mackenzie King. The American Civil War and the Fenian Raids' influences on Canadian independence from Great Britain. The Civil War, of course, took place from 61 to 65, and the Fenian Raids between 1866 and 1871. They both had significant roles in shaping our independence from Great Britain. But as for the American Civil War, let's see how this affected us. It created military and political tensions. The Civil War heightened tensions between Britain and the U.S. Britain's neutrality and his support for the Confederacy due to the cotton trade angered the Union, leading to incidents like the Trent Affair, where a British ship was seized by the Union Navy. Canadian sympathy for the Union. Many Canadians sympathized with the Union cause, partly due to their opposition to slavery and their close economic ties with the northern United States. Increased military presence. The threat of American invasion led Britain to station troops in Canada, which underscored the need for a more unified and self-reliant defense. Fenian Raids. This is where my family comes in. Irish-American veterans, known as the Fenian Brotherhood, composed of Irish-American Civil War veterans, launched several raids into Canada to pressure Britain to withdraw from Ireland. They were going to capture the Welland Canal till Britain would free Ireland for home rule. My own great-grandfather was a veteran of this conflict and received a grant of land in some God-forsaken part of Ontario on the Canadian Shield in case he had a sudden urge to go farm rock. My cousin, Roy Reimer, still pays the taxes on that property. Great-granddad once told my father that the only thing he shot during the Fenian Raids was a farmer's cow to feed the boys from the Lincoln and Welland Regiment in which he had served. It was a 2-day march from St. Catharines to get to Ridgeway, where the engagement took place. Canadian unity. The raids exposed weaknesses in Canada's defense and highlighted the need for a unified military and political structure. Path to Confederation. The threat of Fenian attacks and the desire for a stronger defense were key factors to the Confederation of Canada in 1867. Both events underscored the vulnerabilities of British North America and accelerated the movement toward a more independent and unified Canadian nation. Now the steps toward that unification. The Charlottetown Conference and the need for confederation to establish Canada as a nation capable of self-government and self-defense, independent of the U.S. The Charlottetown Conference was held between September 1st and 9th of 1864 in Charlottetown, PEI. It was a pivotal moment on our journey towards Canadian Confederation. Originally planned solely as a meeting of representatives from the maritime colonies of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI to discuss a possible union, the conference took a significant turn when delegates from the province of Canada, present-day Ontario and Quebec, were invited to join. Key outcomes of that Charlottetown Conference: discussion of union. The conference shifted from focus from a maritime union to a broader union of all British North American colonies. The delegates discussed the benefits of uniting the colonies to create a stronger, more self-sufficient entity. Agreement on principles. While no formal decisions were made, there was a general agreement on the principles of union, including the need for a federal system that would allow for both regional autonomy and strong central government. This is distinctly different from the American system, which emphasizes states' rights and their autonomy. Social interactions. The conference included social events, such as dinners and banquets, which helped build relationships and trust among the delegates. Path to Confederation. The Charlottetown Conference was followed by the Quebec Conference in October of 1864, where a more detailed plan for Confederation was drafted. This plan, also known as the 72 Resolutions, laid the groundwork for the British North American Act, which was passed by the British Parliament and came into effect on July the 1st, 1867, creating the Dominion of Canada. Significance. The Charlottetown Conference marked the beginning of a series of negotiations that ultimately led to the formation of Canada as a self-governing nation. It was also a crucial step in the process of confederation, demonstrating the willingness of the colonies to work together towards a common goal. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as counterpoint to peace, order, and good government. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and peace, order, and good government are two foundational principles that reflect differing philosophies and priorities in the founding documents of the United States and Canada, respectively. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a phrase from the United States Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson in 1776, which encapsulates the core values of American political philosophy of individual rights, emphasizing the importance of individual freedoms and personal rights, self-governance, reflecting the belief of the right of the people to govern themselves and seek their own path to fulfillment, rejection of tyranny, stresses the need to break away from oppressive government that do not respect these fundamental rights. Now, our version, peace, order, and good government. This phrase is from the British North American Act, now the Constitution Act of 1867, and highlights the priorities of Canadian Confederation. Collective well-being, focuses on the overall stability and welfare of society. Rule of law, emphasis the importance of legal order and governance structures that maintain peace and prevent chaos. Public interest, prioritize decisions that benefit the many, often through a strong and proactive government role. Contrasting these philosophies, obviously, it is in some ways individualism versus collectivism. I would advocate, however, that that's a recent thing that came about, and we're going to, in the mid-60s. We'll get to that in a second. The American principle underscores individual rights and personal freedoms, while the Canadian principle emphasizes collective well-being and social order. Liberty versus stability. The U.S. approach values liberty as the highest good, where the Canadian approach values peace and stability, often requiring a balance between individual freedoms and societal needs. It is the stability of our system of government that has allowed Canada to avoid some of the more violent extremes of civil discord so common in America. The belief in stable, calm, responsible government is an unreconcilable difference between our two nations are governed. That is, until the erosion of Canadian values, which have occurred largely but not entirely under the Liberal Party of Canada since the mid-1960s, due to Parliament pursuing a progressive agenda. Government role. The American ideal tends to advocate for limited government intervention in personal lives, while the Canadian ideal supports a more active government role in ensuring public welfare. Again, I must point out that this intervention in individual freedom largely began with Pearson's version of a more state intervention in our lives. It was also Pearson who was instrumental in bringing Pierre Trudeau to the fore, a moment in our political history which began our downhill slide toward the tyranny of his son. Nevertheless, these differing principles reflect the unique historical context and cultural values of each nation. The American focus on individual liberty arose from a desire to escape British colonial rule, while the Canadian emphasis on peace and order emerged from a need to unify diverse provinces and maintain stability under the British Crown. My summating thoughts. We face the possibility of prorogation in the coming weeks to delay the fall of the current corrupt government. This will only serve to further abuse Canadians who are already suffering. All of this is due to our rejection of Christianity as the underpinning principle upon which any functional government's value, principles, legislation, and laws must rest. For without Christ, Canada cannot exist as a nation to fulfill our most fundamental constitutional principle of peace, order, and good government. So here we are, once again being bullied from the South in a 2-century-old fulfillment of America's quest for manifest destiny. Trump is being lauded as our savior by many Canadians on my social media feed who claim some affiliation with conservatism. I often wonder whether real conservatives and true liberals exist anymore at all. I am being given constant proof of the failure of our education system due to our progressive school boards. This failure has virtually erased the knowledge required to understand what either of these political philosophies mean. For Trump to suggest that Wayne Gretzky could simply become the next prime minister, or more insultingly, governor, without first becoming the leader of a political party capable of winning an election, shows his massive ignorance as to how the Canadian system of governance functions. Trump referred to Gretzky as a good candidate to become the governor of Canada, an offer which the Great One promptly turned down due to its insulting impossibility. I was forced to study American history as a lad, something which at the time I found boring. Today I am grateful that I was offered perspective as to why the USA still operates on principles that threaten our autonomy. It is not a godly move to interfere in the sovereign government of another nation. It is not for America to tell us how to fix our own problems brought on by neo-Marxist progressives, a term which I despise due to its meaninglessness, who have weakened us once again to the point where we are made vulnerable to American expansionism and threats to our sovereignty. For those of you who may think, based upon what I have stated, that I am not pleased Trump won, would be missing the point, since I am pleased that he won. Frankly, the reason you are missing the point is due to the fact that you lack a proper historical perspective of how and why our situation is so dire. Due to ungodly hubris, we often think that we know more than what we do. Donald Trump is not Canada's savior. Jesus Christ is. If you claim to be a Christian, then you need to stop worshiping the false god of political messiahs. We must pray that Trump's new administration will serve God's will in America, and that the parliamentary system here in Canada we have inherited from our ancestors will right itself, since its traditions have served us so well until the progressives corrupted it with their godless agenda. These are my thoughts for the new year. God bless you all. These are things that we must all pray in agreement about. I look forward to our next session. Leave your thoughts, your comments, and your criticisms. Take good care.